Hello, dear ones. I'm back in Seattle after almost 5 weeks in India, and after a lot of the first part, as well as guiding a self inquiry residency, I found that in guiding minds into quiet, into silence, not necessarily silence of expression or speech, but just the mind coming to its source. Um, wasn't finding myself typing up too much to share. So, trying out a video format instead, which isn't common for me. I have a cat, a feline, trying to get my attention here since I'm back. So, and I'm inspired to share a little bit about this concept of spiritual bypass. And I find it getting mixed up with the understanding of transcendence. And so I'm going to try free flow, live, share the distinctions, and maybe it would assist some of you in finding some rest and reprieve from thinking or believing constantly that you have to, you're in the mind that you have to watch out for spiritual bypass and be diligent in avoiding the pitfalls and so on. So when transcendence is spoken of, the first thing that has happened is that the idea of being someone, the self-image, has either already fallen completely or it is highly eroded. It has suffered enough blows that it is a small shrinking identity. And from this place, it becomes easy to notice that any patterns that are coming up, any experiences that are coming up, any emotions that are coming up, including the events in the apparent outer sphere and the apparent world, they don't seem to have something to do with you, because the idea of you itself is diminished or distracted and dissolved. So that's what transcendence is. What spiritual bypass is it could be positive thinking one's way, or it could be conceptualizing that, all of this doesn't have anything to do with me. But the core difference is that the idea of me is very much alive. Now, once the idea of me is alive, once a self-image is alive and kicking in, whether in this way or that way, whether apparently diminished but then rearing its head in other sneaky ways, if that is alive, then so-called bypass is inevitable. It doesn't matter what you're doing. So you could say noticed spiritual bypass and then say, I'm going to be really grounded and do whatever it takes to what the mind thinks grounding is, which it could be a lot of somatic work, it could be working with your emotions, it could be working with counselors and therapists to deeply understand deep traumas, all of this stuff. And nothing wrong with any of that. It's in fact productive to spend one's time examining what appears to be you, so long as a self-image is alive. And still, all of it is a bypass. You see, it doesn't matter which way the bypass happens. It is bound to happen because, maybe I'm kind of flipping bypass on its head as well. What I'm suggesting is that so long as there's a self-image, the self-image is going to co-opt whatever process is undertaken in self-examination and bypass the fundamental illusion and delusion that there is somebody called you. You see? So there's nothing to worry about bypass. If you're not numbing and repressing and shoving things down, then the rest of the time you're spending digging up and exposing and sharing and bringing up and alchemizing and metamorphosing and redirecting and managing, and you're doing something or the other where there's a you still involved. So long as there's a you still involved, the fundamental misunderstanding is still being bypassed. So spiritual bypass is only a relative term within the psychological domain, where it would appear that certain feelings, emotions, and body patterns that have been shoved down are now recognized as shoved down and are being brought up to be seen. That's a very productive and worthwhile exercise. And still, there's no need to be caught up in the idea of what repression is and what bypasses. That it's an inevitable cycle that's going to occur with any psyche or any mind that is still under the impression of being something, being somebody. Now, once that framework shrinks or minimizes or entirely collapses, are there patterns, mind patterns and emotion patterns and body patterns to be surfaced? Sure. They can surface over, like the common metaphor of light switch, the fan switch going off and then the fan still moving to come to a standstill. There can be exactly apparently the same body-mind patterns coming up for release and quiet, ultimately into full dissolution, which, by the way, in the other process will never happen. You'll find that you'll keep digging, because there's somebody called you who has to keep looking, right? In this case, that's not the way it is. So here, however, so long as the fan is stilling, it's still transcendence all through, because there is nobody whose patterns they are. They are simply ripples in the water that are finding their own end. And in fact, the switch being turned off, the switch of meanness being turned off, is precisely how they don't find any more, nothing is feeding them. There's no energizing of life force into the pattern. So then they find their own end. They just find their own end, just like anything that rippled in water has to eventually diminish and disappear, and then the water is still again. And all through that apparent process of the fan stilling, it is all transcendence. So now there is no question of bypass. There's no fear that, oh, am I bypassing? So let's consider that the identity structure hasn't fallen, but it has diminished and shrunk. It can, of course, at any stage, again, very cleverly and sneakily, form some idea of itself and sort of feed the patterns again. But eventually it's going to, once it has diminished, it's going to go from shrinking to diminishing to it's going to dissolve. And once the full dissolution happens, the patterns cannot be added to anymore. Nothing. That's why sometimes in other language it said no karma for a jnani. No additional karma for a jnani, meaning nothing more anew is being accumulated. So once that is the case, once the me has completely fallen, there's no question of bypass. There's no question of, oh, look, the patterns are still around and there's bypass. it cannot be bypassed, even if it takes various shapes and forms, even if it looks like some big sanskar or some vritti is still around, some habit is still around. In fact, the habits that remain are very superficial. They're just kind of part of the fun, part of the play. This system has certain habits. And people laugh about a chai drinking habit. And ever since there's a smartphone in these hands, because there isn't actually any mind going on, it might very much appear that these hands are also doom scrolling or doing something very inane, and it is inane. But there is no investment, there's no personal investment, there's nobody who is addicted, you see. So superficially it can look the same, and it can even look like, oh look, this habit is being bypassed, but that's not the case. So there is a complete and discrete and binary distinction between transcendence and spiritual bypass. That's one thing to remember. The other thing to remember is that all that one is doing as a personhood is some form of bypass, because it is, whether it is repressing or whether it is expressing and whether it is grounding and whether it is flighty, it's all bypassing the fundamental illusion and delusion, right? So there's no need to extra worry about that being a thing. Okay, all my love and all the best.